Great, thanks, David. All right, so the next thing we looked at was the Lake Marion's fishery. So a few things that we looked at were the history of the fishery and its importance to the community. We did a macroinvertebrate survey, which are aquatic insects. We surveyed the aquatic plants, and we also, as David already covered, assessed the water quality of the lake. We surveyed macroinvertebrates because they're an important food source for fish. We established 9 sites, 1 in Black Earth Creek, 2 in each of the ponds, and 4 in Lake Marion. And we sampled each site 3 times throughout the summer. And knowing that the creek and the ponds and the lake are different ecosystems, we wanted to use the data to show that differences in habitat will be represented in differences in the macroinvertebrate community. So we analyzed the data in 2 different ways. Quantitatively, we looked at 2 diversity indexes, and these indexes showed that there was no significant differences between diversity of any of the 2 sites. So then we took a step back and looked at the data more qualitatively to look at community composition to see if that differed between any of the 2 sites. And we found that it did. Shown here is the top 10 orders that were found at each of the sites and their relative proportion at each site. And you can see that as you move through the system, from the creek to the lake, that the community composition changes. For instance, in the Black Earth Creek, the dominant order was Trichoptera, which are caddisfly larvae. And in the pond, we had predaceous water bugs, hemiptera, and amphipods, which are mostly algae-eating organisms. In the large pond, we had hemiptera again, and then smaller water beetles. And in the lake, the dominant order was Odonata, which are predatory damselfly and dragonfly larvae. And so differences, although this is a qualitative approach to looking at this difference, it does say that there are differences in habitat and water quality, and this may have implications for the fishery. The next thing that we looked at was the aquatic plants, and we did a point intercept survey. With the help of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, we made this grid with 288 points on it, and using a rake and a boat, we went out to Lake Marion in the early summer and surveyed first for curly leaf pondweed, which is an invasive plant. And we found that 20% of the points contained curly leaf pondweed, but also 90% of the points there was visual observation of the plant, so it's pretty proficient around the entire lake area. Later in the summer, we looked at the native plants and to determine the floristic quality of Lake Marion. And the floristic quality is a measure of plant quality compared to lakes in the area. So as you can see here in the green, the floristic quality of Lake Marion is about the same as the lakes in the driftless region, but it's slightly ranked lower than the ones overall in the state. This graph also shows that we found 7 different species of plants in Lake Marion, which is about the same as the driftless region, and once again slightly lower than the state average. Okay, to summarize, we looked through community surveys and interactions at the lake. We found that the fishery is extremely important to the community, and therefore it's a very important resource to preserve and enhance. And once again, the macroinvertebrates, the diversity didn't differ, but there is different community compositions between the sites. And the plant diversity is similar to lakes in the area, but there is also a presence of this invasive curly leaf pondweed, which you can see here. This is a picture taken in the lake. This man was removing curly leaf pondweed before the remote-controlled boat races later in the week. So you can see that this invasive not only impairs the habitat, but it also impairs recreational use of the lake. We also noticed the presence of carp. You can see this is Lake Marion again, and they were seen spawning in this area of the lake. And carp, as David mentioned, degrade the habitat and miss the fish diversity. They uproot plants, they resuspend the sediments, which are nutrient-laden, and they also cloud the water, which overall decreases the fish habitat and impairs sight-feeding fish, which are important for the fishermen. So a few recommendations that we have is first to manage the carp population, because this is degrading the habitat quality, and once the dam is removed, the source population from the creek will be cut off, and therefore if complete control of this population is successful, then the water quality and habitat quality could dramatically improve at this lake. So for Lake Marion, what you want to do is draw down water levels and then remove the rest of the carp with nets or chemical treatments. And you can see this is an example experiment that was done in Lake Windra here in Madison. And this square carp were excluded from it for 3 years, and you can see how much clearer this water is compared to the rest of the lake. And so you can just see how much of an impact just simply removing these carp from the system would have. After they're removed, you can bolster the fish diversity by stocking fish in the lake as well. Another recommendation is to increase the physical habitat available in the lake. So this can be done by, like David said, dredging to deepen the areas, which would provide refuge from cold water in winter and warm water in the summer, and addition of woody debris, nearshore shade, improvement of the aquatic plants, and management of that curly-leaf pondweed would really increase the diversity of the physical habitat, and thus the diversity and health of the fishery here at Lake Marion. So the next thing we looked at was the shoreline habitat at Lake Marion. The shoreline is a really important transition zone between the terrestrial and aquatic environments, and a lot of organisms from both of those environments use this area. And so we looked at the terrestrial vegetation as well as habitat availability and quality. And we also looked at goose management techniques, because there was a strong wanting to get rid of, or to reduce the goose population at this park. So the current conditions of the shoreline of Lake Marion, right now they look like this. They're eroding, and so there's not much of a transition zone between the terrestrial and aquatic environments. And the rest of the park area is intensively mowed, and so there's not much plant diversity here either. And then on top of all of that, there's another invasive plant, the reed canary grass, which you can see right here. This is one of our classmates, Lisa, doing some invertebrate sampling, and in the foreground here is all reed canary grass. So it's really dominating the whole habitat right now. So we recommend to first reconfigure the banks, as David mentioned earlier, which would be to regrade it at a slope, and a more gradual slope, instead of that straight vertical that it was before. And then plant vegetation to allow for more habitat diversity there. We also recommend reducing the mowed areas, first because it creates a natural buffer zone, but more importantly, it will dissuade geese from using the park zone. First, because they eat primarily newly sprouted grass, which is what mowed grass is, and so that's what they prefer to eat. And they also need direct access to the water to raise their young. So if you add more tall vegetation along the shoreline, that will dissuade them from using the area as a place of nesting and congregating. But you don't have to compromise access. You can add paths in between the vegetation, and it ensures access for fishing. So another recommendation is to manage the reed canary grass either through burning, excavation, or herbicides. and also improve the nearshore plant diversity by planting plants along the shore. You can see here examples of the restoration effort in St. Cloud, Minnesota, where volunteers are planting plants along the shoreline. And here you can see a series of going from a degraded shoreline. It's very steep, it's eroding, it doesn't have much plants, and moving from active restoration where they're reconfiguring that bank, and then 3 years after there's a nice diverse plant community there. So just to summarize, David and I just threw out a lot of information, and we just want to emphasize that there are a lot of things that you can do. There are a few things that you can do that will improve multiple aspects of the lake. For instance, if you reconfigure the banks, you will reduce the seepage, you'll improve the fishery by providing more fish spawning areas and plant habitat, as well as improve the natural habitat and biodiversity by extending that shore zone. The next would be if you manage carp, it increases the water quality by stopping the resuspension of those nutrients as well as resuspension of the sediments, which decreases turbidity. And it also improves the fishery by improving that fish habitat and allowing other fish to grow there. And thus improves recreational opportunities because the fishery will be stronger. And another step would be to plant native vegetation along that shoreline. It can decrease turbidity by decreasing the wind and stormwater-borne particles that enter the lake. It also reduces goose habitat, which improves recreational opportunities at the lake, and it also adds to the natural habitat and biodiversity of the lake. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Brad.